black people by police is as old as the country itself. So what made this time different?
It was racial justice that got people into the streets. It was racial justice that got a new level of engagement, of activism and engagement, and people raising their voices.
Soon after Floyd's death, on Memorial Day, cities across the country began debating policy changes and limits to police power.
There's a new call for deep structural reform of policing across the country. Many are now demanding departments be defunded, dismantled, or outright abolished.
What we do need is increased funding for housing. We need increased funding for education. We need increased funding for the quality of life of communities who are over-policed and over-surveilled.
Defunding is a nice catchphrase, but in reality, you're defunding police organizations that, for the most part, are already significantly underfunded.
At the same time, Black Lives Matter went to Main Street. Throughout 2020, the names of other black people killed by police or white vigilantes added fuel to the fire. Some never made national news, while others we'd come to know intimately.
Drawing international attention, Ahmaud Arbery, who's African-American.
You can still see some of the bullet holes on the front of Breonna Taylor's apartment. Her family and their lawyers told me if anyone else had barged into her apartment and shot and killed her, they would have been charged.
Videos showing Rayshard Brooks' deadly encounter with police are sparking a lot of discussion tonight about officer protocols.
Protesters amplified calls for justice Monday, this time in Kenosha, less than 24 hours after police shot Jacob Blake in the back, causing serious injuries.
It wouldn't be the end of bloodshed in Kenosha. 2 days later, as unrest spilled into the streets, a white 17-year-old, Kyle Rittenhouse, of nearby Illinois, shot 3 protesters, killing 2 of them. He claimed self-defense and was later charged with felony homicide and other charges, including reckless endangerment and illegal underage gun possession.
Rittenhouse walked by police, hands up, without being arrested.
They let him literally go home. There are 2 justice systems in America, and that's why people are protesting.
The shootings, the protests, and racial unrest of 2020 reshaped how we saw American policing, our politics, and even ourselves.
If 2020 is remembered for anything, I hope it's remembered as this moment where we all think about the work and the fight ahead, that we recognize that the opportunity to shape and change tomorrow lives inside of all of us, and it begins with us actually working together, fighting together, and translating this racial justice majority we have in this country into a governing majority that can actually implement the type of changes communities deserve.
But is that enough? Did we ultimately get the kind of policy change that you think can effectuate some real movement in terms of social and racial justice?
No, we actually haven't got the policy change that's going to be a force multiplier yet.
The year 2020 also marked a transition from one movement to another, with the passing of civil rights icons, including Congressman John Lewis and the Reverend C.T. Vivian. Both men dedicated their lives to justice, and both died on July 17th during the height of the protests.
When we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades, or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America.
In their spirit, the push for equality kept expanding. It crossed racial and class lines and elevated the voices of women and members of the LGBTQ community as Americans from all walks of life demanded change. But the movement for Black life also spurred a counter-reaction with a wink and a nod from President Trump.
White supremacists and right-wingers, stand back and stand by.
That exchange immediately picked up by the Proud Boys. One Proud Boys organizer saying that the president basically said to go F them up.
I'm a Western chauvinist. I refuse to apologize for creating a modern world. Trump 2020.
The racial justice movement also collided with two other forces, the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 campaigns for president. The stakes couldn't have been higher, as the virus's disproportionate killing of black people exposed structural and systemic racism, and the candidates and their supporters were forced to reckon with that truth.
Do you believe that the epidemic of racism is more threatening than the pandemic of COVID?
Of course. Yes, we have a pandemic that is killing thousands of Americans. But our country was founded on slavery. It was founded on killing black men, innocent black men. So I believe that the racism is causing more damage than the pandemic right now.
For many black voters, racial inequality and the rise of hate in America were key voting issues, and they were critical in President-elect Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump.
The African American community stood up again for me. You always had my back, and I'll have yours.
These hard conversations and debates weren't happening in a political silo. Hollywood and America's multi-billion-dollar professional sports leagues were forced to confront racism too. NASCAR took down Confederate flags. Baseball and soccer players stood in solidarity with its black players.
We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest.
And years after ex-NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick was blackballed from professional football after he took a knee during the national anthem to protest police violence, the women of the WNBA helped lead the way. And NBA players forced the cancellation of games to protest the ongoing killings of black people by police, and the league joined them, adding Black Lives Matter to NBA hardwood, and allowing players to add pro-justice and pro-black slogans to their game jerseys.
There was just no room to run, and there was no way to escape it. And so finally, I think collectively, athletes felt much more empowered. Just the whole mask came off in this country from 2016 to 2020, and you can't unsee what you've seen.
The fires of 2020 burned hot, but the question remains, will we still feel the heat in 2021 and beyond?